man earns $2 million an hour.
Two famous authors engage in a public fight.
A noted man gets a warm place by the fire through a half a peck of oysters.
Can you imagine that? This is Lindsay McCarry once more, ladies and gentlemen, introducing another session of this series of broadcasts in which we try to dramatize for you some of the more surprising incidents and facts of the world. We'll return in just a moment with the first one. And here's our first item. Sometimes we gasp at the fortunes made and lost overnight in a furious buy and sell flurry in the stock market. But did you ever hear of anyone earning $2 million an hour? Yes, I said $2 million an hour. It staggers the imagination to think of what that might amount to in a year or even a month. Just give me one day like that and I'd be willing to let the rest of the world go by. In fact, I'd buy a few things I've always been wanting. But here's the proof of that amazing statement. Vance Breeze, famous test pilot, once took a plane up for a test dive. He took the ship up to 20,000 feet and dived within 4,000 feet of the ground. The dive took up 15 seconds, for which Vance Breeze was paid $8,000. If you're mathematically inclined, expand those 15 seconds into a minute, which gives you $32,000. Multiply by 60, and you reach the staggering total of nearly $2 million per hour. Can you imagine that? You know, it occurs quite often that two famous men will engage in a feud of words over some bitterly contested difference. But it seldom happens that any two great men will come to a physical encounter. It did happen on one Thursday evening in 1931, March 29 to be exact, within the heavily draped and thickly carpeted walls of the Metropolitan Club in New York City. On that night, Mr. Ray Long, editor of the Cosmopolitan magazine, was entertaining at a banquet in honor of the Russian writer, Mr. Boris Pilnyak. Among those attending were such noble names of letters as Mr. Irvin S. Cobb, Mr. Haywood Broun, Mr. Arthur Brisbane, Mr. Rupert Hughes, Mr. Theodore Dreiser, and Mr. Sinclair Lewis, as well as a rather imposing array of American literary critics. After cigars had been passed and lighted, and as the men of the Fourth Estate sat chatting over their demitas, their host, Mr. Ray Long, arose and tapped on his glass.
Gentlemen, it is our pleasure this evening to welcome to the metropolis and to America a colleague from across the sea, a man of letters who has come to visit our land from the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, a man whose fame has long preceded his actual presence among us, Boris Pilnyak. I'm going to assume the privilege of calling upon several of you to welcome this fellow penman in your own way. First, I know you'll be glad to hear a word or two from a gentleman recently from Minnesota, but more recently, winner of the coveted Nobel Prize for Literature, Mr. Sinclair Lewis.
Mr. Long, gentlemen, I'm very happy to meet Mr. Pilnyak, but I do not care to speak in the presence of a man who has plagiarized 3,000 words from my wife's book on Russia. Nor do I care to talk before two sage critics who objected to the Nobel Committee's selection of me as America's representative writer.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Now I'm sure we'll all be glad to hear a few words from that Dean of American Humorists, Mr. Irvin S. Cobb.
Thank you, Mr. Long. I don't know whether I'm dean or not, but one thing I'm certain of is that right now I'd rather be dean than president. Well, I suppose you'll expect a story about the old days down in Paducah,
Wisely calling upon surefire Irvin Cobb, Long saved the situation momentarily. Following Cobb, others paid just tribute to the guest of honor, and at last the banquet adjourned. As small groups gathered to discuss the speeches, two newspapermen assigned to cover the event stood by one of the doors.
Hey, what did Lewis mean by the one man who has plagiarized his wife's book on Russia?
Don't you know? Theodore Dreiser. What? Sure, you remember? Dreiser. Hey, look.
What's the matter?
There they are. Lewis and Dreiser sitting at that table, talking.
Yeah, man, and how they're talking.
Come on, let's get up a little closer.
Dreiser, you're a liar and a cheat.
For the love of Mike! Dreiser slapping Lewis in the face!
Yes, friends, truly indeed did Mr. Lewis, Nobel Prize winner, author of Main Street, Babbitt, and Aerosmith, receive several resounding smacks upon his countenance from the ample palm of portly Mr. Dreiser, Nobel Prize runner-up, author of An American Tragedy, The Genius, and The Hand of the Potter, until the latter was restrained by fellow writers. The next day, remarked Mr. Lewis.
Dreiser's a pretty big fellow. He must weigh close to 200 pounds. I'll bet he could have put up a good scrap if they'd let us go. Still, he's pretty old. Must be 60. You know, he was an established editor in New York when I was just a kid trying to get along. The incident, however, is closed as far as I'm concerned. Can't two men have a private squabble without all this fuss being made over it?
When, after some difficulty, Theodore Dreiser was located at his apartment on 57th Avenue, he made the succinct comment.
It was the proper retort to any insult.
And thus did 1931 witness the amazing progress of battle between two of America's leading writers. Can you imagine that?
God helps those who help themselves.
And that's a saying that's well enough known to everyone, but here's a case where it was put to practical use by the famous American statesman, Benjamin Franklin. It's one of those human interest stories that take the varnish and veneer of legend away from our national heroes and make them just plain human beings like ourselves. It seems that Benjamin Franklin was traveling one night in bitterly cold weather. He reined his horse up in front of a cozy-looking tavern, and one of the hostlers ran up to meet him.
Good evening, sir. It's a bit cold tonight.
Yes, it is. But I suppose I'll be able to thaw the ice from my bones in your tavern here. Looks cozy enough.
Well, I don't know, sir. A lot of others had the same idea. A few of the townsmen are toasting themselves in front of the fire. This saves wood in their own homes.
And no place by the fire for a frozen traveler?
None at all, sir. But you can try. I'll take your horse to the stable, sir.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, sir. Good evening. It's a bit cold out there.
Yes, but cozy in here. Warm, with a cheery fire.
Well, I always manage to keep a blaze going, sir, even with times as hard as they are.
I suppose I couldn't find a place by the fire.
Well, now, sir, the places are all taken.
Well, no matter. But, landlord, you may take a half peck of oysters out for my horse.
A half peck of oysters for your horse?
A half peck of oysters for my horse.
Very good, sir.
And, landlord.
Yes, sir?
On the shell.
Oysters on the shell for a horse? Bless my soul, I'll get them right away, sir.
Oysters on the shell for a horse. I'm going out and see the horse eat them.
A seat by the fire. Nothing like it on a cold night.
So Franklin seated himself comfortably in one of the vacated chairs by the fire. But it wasn't long before...
I beg your pardon, sir. I beg your pardon. But your horse won't eat the oysters.
Oh, won't he? Well, no matter now. Just bring them in here, and I'll eat them myself.
And so Benjamin Franklin, the humorist and statesman, got himself a warm place by the fire with no fuss, no bother. Can you imagine that? Comes time now for another of our Can You Imagine That musical oddities. We all like to play detective, and now we're going to give you your chance to do a little melodic snooping. If you ferret out the clues, you can award yourself a bright badge and a diploma complete with fingerprint outfit. First, let's listen to a composition of the immortal Frédéric Chopin, whose delicate musical traceries have left him undying fame. While you're listening to it, try to figure out what popular tune of pre-war days sounds very, very much like it. Are you ready? Then listen to Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu in C-sharp minor. you catch it? Well, we're not going to give you another chance on the fantasy impromptu, but here's the popular tune of pre-war days. We're sure you'll recognize the melody, but if you don't, the lyrics will tell you all about it. Listen.
I'm always chasing rainbows, watching clouds drifting by. My schemes are just like all my dreams, ending in the sky. Some fellows look and find the sunshine. I always look and find the rain. Some fellows make a winning sometime. I never even make a gain. Believe me, I'm always chasing rainbows, waiting to find a little bluebird in Believe me, I'm always chasing rainbows, waiting to find a little bluebird in vain.
And there it is, the closing item on another session of Can You Imagine That? But we'll be back with you soon on this same station, and we most heartily invite you to be with us at that time. Until then, this is Lindsay McHarry saying goodbye now.
A building more than 500 years old rises from the sea.
Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. That statement was made after the American Revolution.
5 well-known tunes can be found in a famous popular song.
Can you imagine that? Yes, this is Lindsay McCarry back with you once more, friends. And those statements you heard are all true. In just a moment or two, we'll be back with you with the absolute proof. Wait for us, will you please? And now we're ready for the first item on this session of this series of Can You Imagine That broadcasts. It isn't often that students of archaeology experience the good fortune that the citizens of Walton-on-the-Naze on the east coast of England had on the day of January 3rd, 1928. For several days, a torrential storm had lashed the seacoast. Gargantuan waves had beaten the rocky promontories. Winds of cyclonic intensity had forbidden the villagers to venture from their homes. At last, the elements abated, and the good people of Walton emerged to view the seascape, to smell the new air washed clean by winter rain, wind, and waves.
I say, ain't this wonderful now?
Aye, that it is, Jimmy. 'Tis a beautiful sight.
Aye, look! What struck Henry, do you suppose?
Jimmy, Mikey, look, down to the sea.
Why, what is it? 'Tis a building.
Oh, the lost church. The lost church, Jimmy. That's what it is. I'm going back to the house. 'Tis an omen, that's what it is, an omen.
Oh, your woman's daft, Jimmy. 'Tis no omen at all. 'Tis just the low tide what's given up the old church to our view once more.
The lost church. After all these hundreds of years.
Come, let's go down and have a look at it.
Aye, before the tide flows back again.
Come on, everyone. Down here.
But before the people of Walton-on-the-Naze could reach the shell and seaweed-covered church, the jealous Atlantic had once more swallowed it from their astounded gaze. Built more than 1,000 years ago, the old parish church had been submerged since the year 1398. The coast had suffered from erosion, allowing the ocean to beat higher and higher on the rocks, farther and farther inland, until almost 550 years ago, the ancient edifice had disappeared beneath the waves, never to be seen again except on that wintry day in 1928 for a few all-too-brief moments by the amazed and frightened villagers. Can you imagine that? What American citizen hasn't heard this declaration?
Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute.
I imagine that most of you think this statement originated during the War for Independence, the American Revolution. If you think so, you're wrong. Yes, because it was made after George Washington had served his second term as President of the United States, when John Adams was President. During the period of the French Directory, the United States of America had declared their neutrality in a current disagreement between France and England. France disagreed with this move and declared aggression toward American shipping, a virtual declaration of war. 3 emissaries were sent to France, Elbridge Gerry, John Marshall, and Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. When the American ministers arrived in France, the Directory refused to receive them unless, and here's the rub, unless they would pledge payment into the Treasury of France of $250,000. When this ultimatum reached Charles Pinckney, he cried,
Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute.
When the action of the French Directory became known in the United States, popular enthusiasm for war against France rose to fever pitch. Patriotic songs and speeches were heard on every hand in the new country. As a matter of fact, several naval engagements occurred between American and French ships. The U.S. Congress organized a new army. George Washington was recalled from retirement and appointed commander-in-chief. Alexander Hamilton was selected as first major general. War with America's erstwhile allies seemed imminent. But a new turn of events transpired in France. Napoleon Bonaparte abolished the Directory in November 1799, became first consul and virtual dictator, and instead of pursuing the Directory's policy towards America, sought peace and goodwill. And thus, a very probable French-American war was averted. You know, there's an old saying that goes like this.
A golden mirror may blind the wisest man.
Which means, of course, that money, or the apparent possession of a lot of it, can make fools of otherwise shrewd, cautious men. And the proof? Well, in the late 1870s, a French peasant girl whose name was Thérèse d'Aurignac announced to an astounded France,
Oui, oui. I am the sole heir of an American. His name is Robert Henry Crawford.
Sole heir, mademoiselle? And of course you have proof.
Oui, monsieur. Here are the papers. You see, Monsieur Crawford was so very, very grateful that I nursed him through a very serious illness. Oh, mon Dieu, but he was ill.
Yes, Mademoiselle d'Aurignac. The papers, please. Mon Dieu. Mademoiselle, this will leaves you heir to 20 million American dollars.
20 million American dollars. The news spread. Little Thérèse d'Aurignac became famous. She married Frederick Humbert, son of a cabinet minister. Of course, some people doubted the existence of the fortune until the news went around that two nephews of the American, Crawford, had arrived from America to break the will. Said one of them,
Of course, we don't mean to cut Therese off without a penny. She was good to Uncle Robert, but we feel that we should be entitled to some of the money. So we're going to sue for an enforcement of another will, which will give Therese $72,000 a year.
$72,000 a year. A nice, tidy little income. The nephews insisted that until they had reached an agreement about the wills, Therese should have legal custody of the securities. A French notary sealed a strong box containing the fabulous sum and placed it in a safe under protection of the courts. Thus, the fortune was given legal standing. Therese, now Madame Humbert, achieved dazzling splendor in society. She lacked nothing. Her procedure for buying something was simple.
Ah, Madame Humbert, we are honored that you should come into our store. There is something you wish?
Yes, monsieur, there is. A diamond necklace for the ball tomorrow night.
Diamond necklace? Oui, but yes, the finest. Of course. Here is one for only 100,000 francs.
That will do. Deliver it this afternoon. For the money, I will make you a note, payable after I secure my legacy. That is agreeable to you?
Oh, but yes. Anything Madame wishes.
For the fur coat, I will give you a note, payable after my legacy is established. I wish to give a party. There must be champagne, all kinds of food, and lovely souvenirs for the guests. I will give you a note, payable after the legacy is mine.
Well, that went on for 20 years. Madame Humbert, the former little peasant girl, Thérèse d'Aurignac, lived in luxury for 20 years while the court fight for the wills went on and on. At length, Madame Humbert's payable notes amounted to over $11 million. Then, suddenly, in 1902...
I tell you, I am right. I must be right. I grew suspicious, so I looked up this Crawford family. I wrote to America. Monsieur, there is no such person as Robert Henry Crawford. I am ruined. Oh, mon Dieu.
The hoax was uncovered. 10 creditors committed suicide. Finally, the safe deposit box was opened in the presence of Madame Humbert's distinguished attorney. The contents were noted, and these were found.
Securities worth $1,000, a jewel case that is empty, several worthless copper coins, and monsieur, a brass button.
The Humberts and the fake American nephews had fled to Spain. They were brought back, tried before a laughing public which had been amused, and were given ridiculously short sentences. Thus, for 20 years, a clever bunch of confidence workers hoaxed the courts of France and ruined gullible merchants. Can you imagine that? Now, we're going to take you into the realm of musical oddities once more, to prove to you that even in popular music, there's nothing new under the sun. So, let's get our tonal scalpel out and do a little dissecting on the body of Yes, We Have No Bananas. In other words, let's break it down, phrase by phrase, and see what other tunes it sounds like. For instance, the first measure and a half could very well be the first phrase of Handel's Hallelujah Chorus.
Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Then there follow 3 measures of an old familiar tune.
Oh, bring back my Bonnie to me.
Yep, that was, of course, My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. Then Well, there appear to be just a few bars of the middle part of another song you'll remember. It's from Balf's operetta, The Bohemian Girl, and it's I Dreamt I Dwelt in Marble Halls.
I had riches too great to count, could boast of a high ancestral name.
And the next recognizable phrase is this.
In the sky, the bright stars glitter.
And now with different words.
We've an old-fashioned tomato.
Then, of course, it seems to start all over again, and when you put it all together, it spells not mother, but yes, we have no bananas. Well, that's another batch of Can You Imagine That items for a while, friends, but we're coming back on this same station soon again. Will you be listening for us? We hope so. Until that time, this is Lindsay McCarry saying goodbye now.